Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Live stream of this podcast. I'm actually not wholly comfortable with this, but it's kind of fun at the same time to get the live reaction. So thank you to all of you who have tuned in and have joined us on this live edition of the podcast. All right. Without further ado, I unveil my initial working list as to who I believe could take over as BYU Athletics director in the wake of Tom Holmoe's retirement. I'm going to throw this up here. It's a full screen and deal with it. It's a Google Doc. So here we are. We have internal candidates and what I consider to be external candidates from BYU. There are three principal internal candidates. Obviously, Brian Santiago has been just an absolutely stalwart deputy AD to Tom Holmoe. He would be on my short list for the favorites at this juncture to take over the job because he's been biding his time. Brian's been very, very good as an administrator over basketball. He's worked very well in the NIL space for BYU. And obviously, him being around BYU as much as he has, should give him a chance to move over essentially a seat and take over as BYU AD. Next one up, Liz Darger. She is the senior associate AD and also the senior woman administrator for BYU Athletics. Liz has been working at BYU for quite some time. Many of you might not know who she is, what she does, but I can tell you, she is a force in college athletics. She is highly respected around the country. She also has a great love for BYU and its mission. And I know that in this day and age, we want to talk about hires that can make an impact. Hiring a person like Liz Darger as BYU's athletic director, I think would signal a really strong move by the board of trustees and the LDS Church. But Liz has got the credentials. I like I said, I know that many of you may not be aware of her name, but she's done a lot of stuff behind the scenes for BYU Athletics that really kind of goes unnoticed. The other name to keep an eye on internally, Chad Lewis, the former BYU tight end, the Philadelphia Eagle. He is working right now as the associate AD for development. So the job that Tom Holmoe ascended from, associate AD for development, into the top job is the job that Chad Lewis is in right now. Chad is about as affable a personality as you're going to find in the athletic department. He is well-liked, loved. Obviously, his time playing for BYU football has a lot of people out there thinking that he could be a rock star as the next AD for BYU. But those three absolutely should and will, I would imagine, get interviews to take over this post. They are strong internal candidates. And if the board of trustees, guys like Shane Reese and Keith Vorkink, who lead BYU as the university president and obviously the advancement vice president in the case of Keith Vorkink, they want to keep it in-house and keep it rolling. Those three are on the short list, I think, for the gig. Now, if BYU decides to look outwards, and I believe that they should entertain all options on this job, who else could they look at? Well, you have names like a Craig Angelos. Now, some of you may know Craig Angelos, played baseball for BYU. He was most recently the athletic director at the University of Hawaii out there in Honolulu. He was unceremoniously dumped from his position after having a very strong start to his tenure. There were a lot of people who thought he was doing some special stuff for Hawaii, and then the university president decided to essentially whack him, and he's been unattached since then. He has worked all over the country. I could go through his resume, and it includes like Miami, Long Island. He's worked at like every level of college athletics and comes with a strong resume. And like I said, played for BYU baseball and is a Salt Lake City native. So maybe he wants to come home and be a BYU. Next one up, Jerry Bovee, formerly the deputy AD at Utah State University. Now, I will admit, Jerry is a bit of a long shot in my mind because he has got a lawsuit and a grievance and different pending legal matters with Utah State after he was let go from his position. He's been fighting that, and I don't know how that might impact the chances of him ending up at BYU, but he is a guy that's been around athletics, college athletics, for a long time. Had a really strong run at Weber State. I thought had a really good run at Utah State as well before being let go by Diana Sabo, but I don't know how the pending legal situation might impact him. Peter Pilling, a guy who was actually in the mix when Tom Holmoe was hired at BYU, has been at Columbia for a decade now in the Ivy League. My only question about Peter is he too old now? I think he, much like Tom, is in his 60s. Is he past what BYU wants in terms of an age for an athletic director? But As we all know, age is just a number. But Peter Pilling, longtime administrator in his own right, and is a sitting AD right now. Another sitting AD just up the road from BYU. Jared Sumsion, currently working at Utah Valley University. I think he's done some really good things at UVU, and he may be looking to take the next step, obviously, and he could be a strong candidate. If they want another senior women administrator, another female candidate, Kathy Nixon, who's the UVU associate AD and a former BYU basketball coach, she could be in the mix as well. So 2 candidates just up the road with the UVU Wolverines. Then I come to Danny Ainge, Utah Jazz CEO. Now, much like I just mentioned with Peter Pilling, Danny's now in his 60s. I know that he is a BYU basketball super fan. He shows up to every home game. He is a beloved legend at BYU. Would he consider stepping away from the front office life with the Utah Jazz and want to take over BYU Athletics? Maybe worth kicking the tires on and saying, hey, Danny, what do you think? But he was the name I came up with. Another one out of left field who would be a proverbial big fish out there, Scott O'Neil. Now, some of you know the name Scott O'Neil, some of you don't, but he's been working for Merlin Entertainment. He's a longtime NBA executive for the Philadelphia 76ers, and just recently, I think like a month ago, took over as the CEO of Live Golf. Obviously, Greg Norman had been in the CEO role since Live had been founded. He has stepped aside, and Scott O'Neil has slid into that spot. He is a high-powered, highly thought of, just athletics mind. He's done everything in sports, it feels like. And O'Neil probably wouldn't come cheap, because when you're working for Live, we all know that they are flashing all kinds of cash out there in the world. And the other thing about it is you look at him and what he's capable of doing potentially for BYU Athletics, he would raise the profile for BYU. Think of Scott O'Neil. Remember when Kevin Young was hired from BYU basketball and what he brought in terms of the reputation, et cetera, to BYU? That's what Scott O'Neil could be. Like I said, it's not going to come cheap, because when you're making the money he's probably making right now, tough to do it. And the final name I came up with, and it comes from a couple of our Locked On Cougars Insider listeners, Steve Young. Now, Steve, obviously, much like a Danny Ainge, much like Chad Lewis, a beloved BYU football or BYU athletics legend. Steve is well past his playing days, but since he got done playing, he's got a law degree. He runs a very, very successful, what do you call it, a venture capital firm out there in the Bay Area. Hey, does Steve want to take over his next deal and be running BYU Athletics? It's worth kicking the tires on as well. So that's kind of my list I came up with. I'm sure there'll be other names that pop up as this hunt progresses, because we just don't know the timeline quite yet. We'll learn more about that tomorrow when we speak with Tom, as well as Shane Reese. But that's what I got for you guys. Those are who I have on the list. And by the way, if you have others that you would like to see on the list, and you have names that you're thinking of, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Drop them in a YouTube comment, or send them to us via social media or email, lockedonbyu@gmail.com. Let us know. But there are going to be no shortage of options out there when it comes to this position, both internally and externally. BYU's in a very, very good spot. They're a new member of the Power Four. They obviously have been handling their finances the right way. Like I said, this is not an athletic department that is in the red and you're having to come in and cut things to be able to manage the budget. Everything that goes on for BYU right now is in a good spot. And Tom Holmoe, like I said, has just set it up for BYU to really just keep it rolling here. So that's who I have in terms of candidates to take over that position. But there will be a lot more. And by the way, I'll just add this. I said this on social media on Locked On Cougars. You, as of right now, as the recording of this podcast, you could be a candidate for the BYU Athletic Department, BYU Athletics Director job, because really anybody's a candidate right now. So think about that. That'd be pretty fun to take over that gig. But nonetheless, a lot of strong options out there. And BYU, like I said, we'll have no shortage of options out there for them as they move forward here. And we'll have more for you guys in coming days and weeks on this. We'll do a podcast tomorrow. Let you know more of maybe what the timeline is, what they're thinking of BYU. If more names emerge as candidates for the gig, I'll be sure to pass them along right here on the podcast.